Hello, welcome back to another ray tracing comparison. If you haven't as yet, make sure to check out my other ray tracing comparison videos, and I've got links of those videos in the description below. So today we're going to do a comparison for LEGO Builders Journey, which just released a few days ago on PC and Switch. It's actually been out on iOS and Android since December 2019, but this new version packs more levels and includes ray tracing on the PC for ray tracing capable GPUs. So with every ray tracing video I do, I'm hoping to learn more about how it works, performance requirements, techniques used in ray tracing to get a better understanding and separate it from the hype. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and join our Discord community for more gaming discussion. Here are the specs of my PC listed on the screen, and we're going to first discuss performance of the game with ray tracing and DLSS, and then we'll look at a side-by-side comparison with ray tracing on and off. If you thought a puzzle game couldn't be all that GPU intensive, LEGO Builders Journey would like to have a few words. A scene that's more or less a fixed perspective and not a whole lot of moving aspects can still be demanding on the GPU. It's also a game that works on a mobile device, though admittedly it lacks a significant amount of detail, with a lot of the post-processes like reflections and quality shadows removed. There's without question a far bigger difference between the iOS and PC version than the PC version with and without ray tracing. In the performance section of the video, I have left DLSS off to determine how much of a performance hit there was due to ray tracing. Interestingly, after looking at a mix of 13 scenes throughout the game, the most GPU intensive scene ended up being the first level, where the frame rate could only manage 30 FPS. That's at 1440p max settings on a RTX 3070. I guess you may as well make a good first impression in terms of visuals. Similarly, in this next scene, it also hovers around 30 FPS, which begs the question why it's so performance intensive. At first, I thought it might have been to do with the ray tracing and running water requiring more rays, but it could also be because the scene is heavily animated with waves coming onto the shore. Let me know your thoughts why the first scene brings the frame rate down so much. In the next two scenes where the characters go hiking, the frame rate fares much better, and with ray tracing off, it can get over 60 FPS, while with ray tracing on, there is now a frame rate drop of about 25% from 64 FPS to 48 FPS. On average, across the 13 scenes I tested, ray tracing on high settings reduces the frame rate by about 24%. DLSS performance was pretty much as expected, bumping up the frame rate by 55 to 60% when ray tracing was turned off, and around 70 to 80% with ray tracing turned on. That said, the image quality took a noticeable hit with DLSS and ray tracing on, where fast-moving objects were far noisier. This occurs in other games with DLSS as well, where this could be the result of DLSS being temporally based, meaning it relies on higher quality images to render the next frame. I'd recommend turning DLSS off when playing and adjusting other settings to increase frame rate. Let's do a comparison between ray tracing on and off now, and to begin, I thought it'd be useful to throw this image up as a reminder of all the terminologies artists use to describe shadows which we'll be using in this video. I do apologize that DLSS is off on the non-ray trace version and DLSS is on for the ray trace version, but it shouldn't affect the comparisons that much. As you can see here, the game is beautifully rendered, the LEGO bricks have the right amount of gloss and reflection to them, and the detail on the bricks even includes some minor scuffs in some cases. At first glance, both scenes look very similar and impressive, but the reflections and shadows in the ray trace scene shows quite a difference. Ray tracing using what looks to be global illumination here picks up the reflected light from the surroundings to give the area a shade of orange, whereas in the non-ray trace scene there is none of the color complexities of the ray trace reflection. You can also see this color reflected on the 3x1 arch brick here. Similarly, with ray tracing shadows, this adds fine detail and definition between bricks. In this scene, the highlights are much more pronounced, as is the background, which is not as noticeable in other scenes. The non-ray trace version is definitely missing highlights in this scene. It's also interesting there's softer shadows in the ray trace scene, whereas usually the other way around in other games. I posted about this scene on the YouTube community page where I asked everyone which scene was ray traced, and I would say most people guessed correctly, as the ray trace scene showed reflections where the non-ray trace scene did not. Here the child's backpack shows stronger highlights and reflections, and the mud bricks facing the player also show reflections as well. There's also significant highlight on the left that you can see on the letterbox piece here. Here's an early scene with a light source, and this is a good comparison because you can clearly see that the light is obscured by the bricks and is far darker here. It's become apparent the light source, the sun, appears to be coming from the top left each time, at least in these early levels, and you can see that the area under the water barrier has a far darker shadow than the non-ray trace version. At nighttime, it looks like the light source, the moon, appears to be from the top right, as indicated by the shadow here. The tree also takes on a very different look, and with its complicated structure, that could be quite the challenge getting shadows right. With complex objects, you sometimes see shadows and light are less defined as a result, where ray tracing helps improve the accuracy and detail of reflections and shadows. Just because a scene is ray traced, there's nothing to say a developer couldn't get close to how a ray trace scene gets resolved by a computer. In this scene, it's so close that it's impossible for me to tell any differences. Here, in this rather annoying level where the light turns on and off every 5 seconds, the lighting in the ray trace scene is really harsh. Much of the reflected light is far darker in the ray trace scene. In these factory scenes, there's a red light on the right hand side in the ray trace scene, which adds a reddish reflection on the bricks. Here's a scene where the final result is pretty close. Can you tell the difference here? Before we end this video, I wanted to walk you through the graphical options and toggle each setting on and off, and we'll start with this hiking scene here. It was harder to notice in the side-by-side comparison before, but when you toggle shadows on and off, there's far more detail in the shadows, especially between bricks. Turning reflections on and off, you can see the tree gaining more highlights, creating depth and making the image look 3D. Toggling the ambient occlusion gives the image a far more natural look as well. Global illumination, which is reflected indirect lighting, adds more highlight into the scene. In this scene with the house, toggling off ray tracing shadows shows the difference between developer placed shadows and ray trace shadows. As you can see, the placement of shadows is slightly different to what the computer has determined. Similarly, with reflections, you can see how much the scene changes with ray tracing. Finally, look at the difference when reflections are toggled on and off here. It appears the ray traced water reflection has a higher brightness value than the non-ray trace version, which is pretty noticeable in-game, but even more stark when toggling on and off. In conclusion, in this ongoing series of ray tracing videos, we're seeing how ray tracing is helping developers improve their graphics by using it to accurately model how light and shadows work, which will ultimately create a more realistic final image. Right now though, whether you prefer ray tracing or non-ray tracing, it appears that either way, both versions still look great and you have the choice to use either. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.